Hello, and welcome back to I Came for Science, a podcast about the science of sex and reproduction and inclusion in STEM. I'm your host, Laura Surratt, and today I'm thrilled to have one of our team members, Daphne Trillana, to introduce you to today's topic. Welcome, Daphne.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. As Laura Surratt said, I'm Daphne. I'm part of the production team and I'm a student at the College of Worcester as well. I actually came up with today's topic, which is male contraceptives or contraceptives for people who produce sperm. And I really wanted to cover this topic because I've been curious about it for a while, and I feel like every few months there's a new article headline talking about the new male birth control that's coming out. And it's supposedly right around the corner, but nothing ever hits the market.
It's funny that you say that because I feel like when I was your age, which is many
Mhm.
decades ago, I felt the same way. Like, where are these contraceptives for people who produce sperm? And I asked my gynecologist about it, and they were like, oh, no, it's way too complicated. That's what I heard then. So I
Yeah.
had that same burning question at your age. Yeah.
And I feel like they keep coming out with different like female birth controls. I mean, there's been so many that they've used in the past and are now off the market and they just kind of create new ones. I remember like hearing about the
The
sponge as
sponge.
well.
Yep,
I don't think
absolutely.
that people use that anymore. I
No,
remember hearing about that on like Seinfeld.
exactly. That's right.
But yeah, there's so many different types and so many different like hormonal and non-hormonal types, and same with like emergency contraceptives. So it's interesting how there's such a limited amount for males as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm just so grateful that you brought up this topic and that you found our guests for today. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our first guest?
Yeah, so our first guest is Logan Nichols, who is the Chief Research Officer at the Male Contraceptive Initiative, and he's going to be mainly talking to us about why has it taken this long and what are the limitations with this field of research.
Great. Welcome, Logan. We're so happy to have you here.
Yeah, Laura, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little about the Male Contraceptive Initiative? What is it? What is its purpose?
Yeah, sure. So MCI, Male Contraceptive Initiative, is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. We're a charitable organization, and we fund research and development into male contraception, as well as advocate for its uptake, its use, its development, its funding. Really try and be the champion for the space in myriad ways.
Well, that is so interesting. So you talk about a small group of people like making this happen, making male contraception happen. But I think what's hard to understand is, well, why did it take this long? Like, why haven't we had male contraception a long time ago, like we did with female contraception?
I think there's a number of reasons why we don't have male contraception yet. You can break them into financial reasons and scientific reasons and societal reasons too. And I think to go into some detail there, right, the scientifically, we found that there are many things we don't understand about the male reproductive system. We understand some things and we have understood them for 50, 70 years. For example, that exogenous hormones can impact sperm production, and so you could theoretically administer, not theoretically, you can practically, we know this, administer exogenous hormones and get a contraceptive effect in men with relatively minimal side effects. But of course, they've been working on developing methods that have profiles that are acceptable to users, like daily pills or gels or injections, things that can actually be developed as products, right? There's a gap between what's scientifically possible and what people might actually use. Questions that weren't answered when these forays first began, back in the 50s, 60s, when female contraception was developed. On top of that, there's also the issue that women are who gets pregnant when it comes to an unintended pregnancy, a contraceptive failure, and so it's important for us to, or at least I believe the impetus has been to develop methods for people who can get pregnant and people who have the burden of pregnancy, such that we can give them autonomy and agency that they need. The focus has been on providing those sorts of options rather than it going towards men. And I think that there's also been a societal expectation that women are the ones who manage pregnancy. I think that's something that's changing every day. But we have, I think, the people who have made decisions in contraceptive development for so long felt that the methods that we have were good enough because women are expected to manage a pregnancy, and therefore, when they have methods that are available to them, they're plenty. I think that's also changing. I think that with the Me Too movement, with men being more engaged in not only reproductive health but also in childcare, child rearing. I think that plays a big role in the shifting dynamic where these options are being asked for instead of envisioned and hypothesized. But I think those are some of the big challenges that have faced male contraception, and that's also part of why I'm optimistic, because I feel those winds are changing. The last one that I mentioned, of course, is financial reasons. Male contraception is an underfunded field. Contraception is an underfunded field. Female contraception has largely been underwritten by the public sector, by the nonprofit sector. I think that we can go back all the way to the original pill was financed by Catherine McCormick, an heiress who collaborated with Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger to generate an option that women could control their own fertility. And so
Thing.
subsequently,
Yeah.
yeah, the development and clinical trials of other contraceptives have been supported by now defunct USAID, by government agencies, and the pharmaceutical sector largely comes in and takes these products once they're developed and then markets them. And so, just to say that contraception is an underfunded field and male contraception is an even smaller piece of that pie. And so, encouraging and incentivizing pharmaceutical companies to get into products is very important to us. And that's part of why we feel that de-risking products in an early development stage is important to incentivize people getting into the game.
Sorry,
That's some of the reasons why that has occurred.
de-risking, is that like taking the financial risk out? Is that what you mean?
That's a great question. No, I actually mean the scientific risk. So that is
Oh,
to say, understanding if a product is safe or effective in an animal species before moving on to human studies. Pharmaceutical companies aren't willing to invest the early R&D money that's required to get to those clinical trials because they feel there's too many chances of scientific failure. I also feel that there's the fear of market failure among pharmaceutical companies. And so they see this as one big algorithm, one big mathematical calculation that says the financial risk may not be worth the gain. You may not get a marketable product.
can you give us a brief history of male contraceptive development?
Yeah, sure. So, I mentioned studies starting in like the 50s. That's how long we've known that testosterone can impact sperm production, or exogenous hormones can turn off sperm production. But there have been other studies that have really happened on and on in the interim, really from then to now. So one particularly interesting and possibly apocryphal story is the story of a drug that was tested in a Oregon penitentiary. And it was tested in the 1950s. So there were prisoners that were given this drug and tested to see if it would turn off their sperm production. And it turns out that it did, and it worked quite well. But there was a side effect such that if you mixed the drug with alcohol, you'd get horribly sick. Initiated what's called a disulfiram reaction. And that disulfiram reaction is actually what's used now in aversion therapy. So that is to say, for people who
Mm,
can't control their alcohol intake, they take this drug and do that to mitigate their own alcohol use. And
interesting, the intersection of these fields. Yeah.
absolutely. And so that was deemed that it was unacceptable for a product, especially in the 1950s. But what's happened is that research line has been carried all the way through, and there's actually an investigator now at the University of Washington who's trying to take that research and separate the contraceptive effect from the alcohol effect. This is something that can be done by specifically targeting a specific receptor in male reproductive biology. But they're working on trying to carry this research through and develop a method based on that approach. There are other methods that have been developed, or excuse me, have been tested in the 70s and 80s, injectable hormonal male contraceptives that seemed to work relatively well, but they required multiple injections on like a weekly basis, and which was deemed to be a product profile that maybe not acceptable enough or profitable enough to continue research on. But those formulations have continued. They've reformulated those drugs. They've made derivatives of these hormonal agents, and that research continues now in clinical trials that are being tested for hormonal male contraception. So it's almost to say that there's always been research in this space, and it's not to say that it's failed, but it's to say that they're continuing to try and develop methods that work for people. And I think that the challenges that I mentioned before, such as the funding challenges or the societal challenges, et cetera, have really been part of the difficulty in developing those methods. But overall, I see those wins changing, especially as these methods enter clinical trials and get further along than they have been in the past.
That's great. So now can you take us to where things stand today and what are the different types of male contraception that are under development or and maybe where things are going, where you see this field going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to break things into three main buckets when it comes to talking about the methods in development. The first bucket, I think, is the most relatable. I call reversible vasectomies, or other people call vas occlusive devices. Instead of cutting the vas deferens, which is a tissue that carries sperm out through the reproductive tract, instead of cutting that vas deferens and ligating or cauterizing or otherwise sealing it off, there's an injection of a substance. Many of these substances are hydrogel polymers, and that polymer acts as a barrier that prevents sperm from passing through. Regardless, there are multiple methods being developed now and one of them has entered clinical trials. That method is called ATOM, and it's under development by a biotechnology company in Charlottesville, Virginia, called Contraline. They've entered clinical trials. They're hoping to advance their product a little bit further. And then there are other fast follower products behind them that could be on the market. It's difficult to put numbers to this, and I always hate doing it, but it could be on the market easily within the next 5 years, some of these methods. Of course, there are clinical trials and many hurdles for them to overcome, but things look promising and people are excited about it, including me. Another method, another bucket that I like to put things in is the hormonal methods. So
Mhm.
there are multiple hormonal methods in clinical trials now, and that's the through line that I mentioned from those studies that were carried out in the 1980s and 90s, and really continuing on into the 2000s even. But there are a few different product profiles that are in development right now. One is a daily dermal gel. Men rub it on their shoulders once a day, and it is an alcohol-based gel that contains testosterone and estrone. And so together, those two hormones inhibit sperm production and essentially make men have a contraceptive effect. Method with estrone and testosterone is in phase 2 clinical trials, moving into phase 3 very soon, which makes it the leading method as far as drug-based male contraceptives go. So it could be on the market within the next, let's also say, 5 years, plus or minus. There are other products in development that we consider sister products. There's a injectable that's in development that could work on a monthly or 3 monthly basis. These things are still being worked out and understood on a clinical level, but it's an injectable product profile, almost a long-acting male contraceptive, similar to the vas-occlusive devices. It would provide protection for a long period of time, and that's in phase 1 clinical trials moving along. And in addition to that, there's a daily oral pill. And, together, I think that's a really compelling trio of products, right? A gel, an injectable, and a pill that can provide a lot of profiles that appeal to a wide range of users. The last bucket that I like to put things into is really in contrast to that, the non-hormonal methods. And that's painting with a really broad brush. There are lots of non-hormonal methods in development that are drug-based. There's a daily oral pill that's entering phase 2 clinical trials now. It's being developed by a California-based startup called Your Choice Therapeutics. That one's also very exciting because that represents one of the furthest non-hormonal methods in development. They're going further than, I believe, any other drug-based.
Well, it has just been a pleasure and so insightful to talk to you about this issue. And I'm really excited about this area. And I'm really inspired by the fact that you're feeling such confidence that this really can come to fruition in the near future. So thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely, Laura. Thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure.
So, welcome back, Daphne. That interview with Logan was so interesting. We really learned a lot about like the overview, the history, the background of male contraception. I'm curious what your thoughts were about it and what you would want to learn more about.
Yeah, I think for me, kind of coming from a more like biological standpoint,
Hmm.
how things work in the body, I think I have a good grasp on like how female birth control works, but in males there are so many sperms, so I'm curious about how they're able to decrease that number enough to prevent pregnancy.
Well, that's an excellent question about how you would go about controlling the production or the transfer of so many sperm. To find out more about this, I'm going to talk to Dr. Stephanie Page, who's an endocrinologist who works on hormonal male contraception. She's a professor of medicine and the head of the Division of Metabolism, Endocrinology, and Nutrition at the University of Washington.
Thanks so much for having me. There's nothing I like to talk about more than contraception.
Yeah, it's so important. I'm wondering if you could start by telling us how you got into this line of research.
So I actually started off doing basic science research and did a PhD in immunology. And as I moved into my clinical training, it became apparent to me that I really wanted to do something that was a little closer to translating into clinical medicine. And I was fortunate to be at the University of Washington, where there was actually already a group here that had been heavily involved in developing male contraceptives for the previous 2 decades. So I found a great mentor. And I think really what struck me was not only the interesting science, but that and not just that it had a clinical translatability, but that it really aligned with some of my values with regards to reproductive agency, public health, and trying to help people at all income levels and all sort of facets of our world have some agency with regards to their really able to meld both my scientific and medical interests and some core values that I have.
And I think, some of our listeners might ask the question, well, why aren't condoms enough for male contraceptives? So, what would you respond to that?
Condoms are very important for sexual health. They're very important for the prevention of sexually transmitted diseases. We shouldn't be underestimated. But condoms aren't great contraceptives. They are definitely better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They are definitely better than the rhythm method or withdrawal, which some people rely upon, but they have about a 13% failure rate. And just to put that in perspective, an IUD has about a 1% failure rate or even less. And the female birth control pill is somewhere in between. So, for the reasons we all know, condoms are difficult to use, to use in the moment. They can break. They require a lot of user initiative to be effective. And we know that with any kind of medicine that requires that, they're less effective. So we need more reversible methods for men. We would like what we understand men would like is to have more male engagement in contraception. Men really only have the condom or a vasectomy, which is really not considered a reversible method. So condoms are great, but they're not awesome contraceptives.
Thank you for that. So then let's dig into the type of male contraceptives that you work on. Can you give us a brief background of those types of contraceptives?
Yeah. So I work on the development of hormonal male methods. I'm an endocrinologist. We work on hormones. And hormonal contraceptives for men work very similarly to hormonal contraceptives for women. So hormonal contraceptives for women, the most common is the birth control pill. There are some patches and implants now as well that are part of that hormonal method mix. And so female hormonal contraception relies upon giving women estrogen and a progestin to block ovulation. So the corollary for men is that we give men testosterone, not estrogen. And we have learned that also giving men a progestin enhances the effectiveness of a male hormonal contraceptive. So when we give men testosterone and a progestin, it blocks the signals from the brain to the testicle that are required for the testicle to make testosterone as well as sperm. And without making testosterone in the testicle, there's not this high testosterone environment in the testicle, and the sperm do not mature. So with women, we're blocking ovulation. With men, we're blocking the production of the millions and millions of sperm that men make every day and ultimately make it into the ejaculate. Contraception relies on giving men exogenous hormones, which interrupts the naturally occurring feedback loop which men have, which is that, and the brain senses that we're giving them testosterone, the testosterone's in the bloodstream, and it turns off the production of testosterone by the man himself. So the man's experiencing the testosterone that we're giving them. They have maintenance of their secondary sexual characteristics like their deep voice, their hair production, and so forth, the testosterone that we give, but they don't need to make it themselves anymore. So it's interrupting that natural feedback loop. And therefore, the outcome of that is that it suppresses the production of sperm. And the beauty of that is that when we stop giving the man the testosterone, all of that feedback loop kicks back in. The brain senses there's not enough testosterone and starts making it again. And that's why these methods are reversible.
You mentioned these secondary sexual characteristics like the deep voice and the hair and stuff like that. So do those become enhanced when they're taking this exogenous testosterone?
They don't. So we're very careful in developing these methods to give men physiologic or normal amounts of testosterone. So what I mean by that is the same amount of testosterone that normal, healthy young men make. When the field was at the original studies in the field actually did give men super physiologic or high doses of testosterone. And they then did have side effects from that. Some of them developed acne, which is a side effect of having too much testosterone on board. Some men had some mood changes. And importantly, when you give high doses of testosterone, men can they enhance their red blood cell production, and that actually can have potentially bad side effects for men. So we're very careful now, and we've learned a lot and we dose the testosterone in the prototype male hormonal contraceptives that we're working on to provide normal levels of testosterone, not too low, so that men don't experience symptoms of low testosterone, and also not too high to have those high testosterone side effects.
And do you have to dose it to the individual? Because I would imagine men vary in their testosterone levels, right?
We don't. And the reason for that is that we have a very good understanding of the normal range of testosterone across the population. Okay. Men's testosterone levels do vary throughout the day. So there's a circadian rhythm to the production of testosterone. But that is not the way testosterone works on end organ tissues. Doesn't vary throughout the day, even though the levels do. Another way of explaining that is that we have good studies where we've varied the amount of testosterone a man has over time and can quantify the side effects that they may or may not be having. And so we know a little bit about the responsiveness of tissues to certain levels of testosterone. So we can't, just like with female hormonal methods, women have different levels of estrogen throughout the cycle, throughout the day, and across the population. But it's not practical to do that kind of precision therapy or precision intervention now. And similarly, male hormonal contraceptives are going to be about providing the normal levels that men across the population experience.
So how are men being treated with the testosterone and progestin?
Yeah. So these hormones can be delivered in a variety of ways. So our group, in conjunction with the Population Council and the National Institutes of Health and colleagues at the Lundquist Institute, have just completed a study where we're delivering the hormones using a transdermal gel. So this is a gel that contains both nesterone, which is a progestin, and testosterone, and the men put it on their shoulders, rub it in every day. So that's one method of delivery that requires the individual to do it every day and is based upon the technology that was developed for testosterone transdermal gel, which is an approved product on the market that men with low testosterone can be prescribed.
Oh, that's neat. So you're just kind of riffing off of that technology that's already there.
The previous studies, this is the first study, which is a user-controlled method, meaning the person's putting it on every day. Previous studies by our group and others have employed implants and injections. So implants and injections that the men receive approximately every 3 months, and those are also very effective. It's been very challenging to develop oral prototype male hormonal contraceptives because of some challenges involved with oral testosterone delivery. So we're doing it currently. The most advanced study is using a daily gel application, but there's been lots of work using injectable and implant applications to deliver the testosterone and progestin.
Why is it difficult to do the oral testosterone? I want to know more.
Yeah. So, just to develop a male birth control pill analogous to the female birth control pill, we'd have to deliver oral testosterone.
Right.
Plus progestin. The progestin's easy. So it turns out that if you just give a man testosterone and he eats it, it's actually broken down in the blood in a matter of minutes.
Really?
So that doesn't work very well. And then the way to increase that longevity period is to do a little bit of modification of the testosterone molecule. And that was done probably 40 years ago. And it's actually still in the market, something called methyl testosterone, which can be given once a day. But the problem with that is it is associated with developing liver problems.
Oh, that is a problem.
So that's no good for contraception. And so recently there has been a big advancement in the development and approval of oral testosterone by doing, again, a little bit of a modification of the testosterone molecule, which is very safe, doesn't have those liver problems associated with it, and is actually on the market for the men who have low testosterone as a replacement. The problem is that it needs to be given twice a day, because the half-life, or how long it lasts in the bloodstream, is only about 12 hours. So, and we just don't feel that a twice daily medication for contraception is really feasible. It's so hard to remember to take a medication once a day, let alone twice. And so that hasn't really moved forward. We are actually involved in some work trying to develop a male pill that could be taken once a day. That's only made it through sort of phase 1 clinical trials, which is very early in development so far, just assessing safety. But hopefully that will be, we or others in the non-hormonal male contraceptive field will be able to develop a once daily pill.
Why would it get broken down in the blood if you're taking it orally, but not if you're taking it transdermally or through injection?
Yeah, so oral delivery is challenging because anything you ingest has to go through two things. One is it has to be absorbed in the intestine. And then secondly, it has to make it through the liver. So the liver is one of our big detoxifying and metabolizing organs. And it just turns out that the liver does a very nice job of metabolizing testosterone in contrast to estrogen. So by the time the testosterone gets out of the liver, there's hardly any of it left. So you just can't do it to get the levels high enough.
So now you have the testosterone and the progestin absorbed into the bloodstream. And then you're lowering the testosterone in the testes. So then what happens in the testes next?
So sperm production in men is a really fascinating process. So the sperm that are like the stem cell for sperm, so the progenitor cells, the early cells, are constantly dividing. And it turns out that the process, though, of getting from that very early stage of development of a sperm to getting all the way out into the ejaculate and hopefully in their case, into the female tract, takes about 72 days, because there's a whole bunch of little things that have to happen in the testicle for those sperm to mature. And when we give hormones and block that high testosterone environment, that process of sperm maturation is aborted or suppressed. And so the sperm there's gradually fewer and fewer sperm in the ejaculate as those 72 days pass. For some men, it doesn't take as long as others, but because we're blocking sperm production very early, male hormonal contraceptive methods take about 8 to 12 weeks to be effective. So in contrast to the female birth control pill, which we usually say takes one cycle, sometimes even less, hormonal contraceptive methods will take a little longer just by virtue of the fact that we're blocking sperm production.
Would it take shorter if the men ejaculated a lot during
I
that
know
time?
you'd think it would, right? That you would just be able to get it all out.
Right, get it all out.
But it's
Clear the
fascinating. The
system.
sperm are actually maturing throughout. There's these very fine tubules in the testicle, and actually at a cellular level, they're going through many, many different steps before they actually get to the ejaculate. And so a lot of it's happening upstream of the ejaculate. So that
so they're in production.
They're in
basically.
production, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it turns out men make, I mean, people don't necessarily appreciate this. Men make millions and millions of sperm a day. So a normal ejaculate has about 40 to 200 million sperm in it. And men are making about 1,000 sperm a second if you do the math. So it's just a ton of sperm. And most of them are actually not functional, despite how long it takes them to graduate, so to speak. But
love that.
but there's just a lot of sperm there. And so one of the challenges in the field initially was trying to determine if we needed to make men azoospermic, so absolutely zero sperm in the ejaculate for a male methods to be effective, or if there was some threshold that still is compatible with effective contraception. And it turns out if you can reduce a man's sperm production so that their ejaculate contains less than 1 million sperm per milliliter, so about 1 to 3 million sperm, that's very effective contraception. So you don't have to get rid of all of them, but you have to do a very good job of getting rid of most of them.
That just blows my mind that even with 1 to 3 million, that the pregnancy rate would be so low.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, especially when we're all, of course, you only need one. I think
exactly right.
It is a reflection of the inefficiency of the process, and that most of the sperm that mature are not great swimmers, or they're not this or that. And also of the somewhat, a lot of things have to align for a pregnancy to happen. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So when we get to that threshold, that doesn't mean there's zero pregnancies. It's a pregnancy rate that is similar to a perfect use of a female birth control pill. So it's not perfect. Zero is perfect, or we would expect 0 to be perfect.
So you said that there's about 1,000 sperm made or started in the production line per second. It seems like then you would have a backlog of sperm because, like, especially if a man's not ejaculating very quickly, what happens to all those sperm? Do they get resorbed?
Yeah,
Do they get in line?
Yeah, if they don't make it out, they get resorbed. I mean, cellular processes are fascinating. And when they don't go right, the body has great ways of just breaking down those cells and recycling the materials for other things. So yeah, they don't just sit there and percolate.
Right. Okay. And then what happens if men miss a dose?
So that's a great question, and one that we don't completely know the answer of. Remember, we're still working on these as experimental methods. They haven't been approved, and we really do need to do the big seminal study, so to speak, to evaluate a new method. But yeah, so if you're using a long-acting injection, for example, we know very much when we are due, and could probably learn about how overdue an injection that was every 3 months could be. With a daily method, it's much more complicated. What I can say is that once a man's sperm is suppressed completely, if they miss a dose, it probably is. We have every reason scientifically to think that 1 missed dose, and maybe even 2, is fine, because it takes a little bit of time for the body to reactivate all those processes. If men are regularly missing doses, or they're missing doses before their sperm is suppressed, that's different, because all those machineries to make sperm are still functioning. So that's a long answer to a short question. And I think the answer is that once men have their sperm suppressed, probably missing a dose isn't going to have a big effect on effectiveness. But regularly missing doses, or missing 2 or 3 doses, could mean that they have to wait another month.
Okay, I want to move now. You have mentioned clinical trials a few times, and I want to hear if you could kind of just walk us through what a clinical trial for some of the male contraceptives that you work on would look like.
Yeah, so the clinical trials for male contraceptives have to progress through various stages. So initially, we do studies just in men to evaluate the safety. That's the primary thing we're looking at. So we want to make sure that when men take something for repetitive times over a month or 3 months, we want to outline what the side effects might be. And those we can do with placebo controls so that we have a good understanding of what is incidental and what is related to the product. So those are very standard for all types of drugs. For male hormonal methods, since we know that we're suppressing sperm production, we then do a larger study in men once we've done those preliminary safety studies to demonstrate that the product effectively and persistently suppresses sperm. So those are usually 6-month studies. Again, don't need a partner, not testing pregnancy, with really just evaluating the time course and effectiveness of suppressing sperm production. And with that in data in hand, knowing that we can suppress sperm production, then we're ready to test the method as a preventer of pregnancy. And that involves enrolling couples. So these are complex studies because we are giving a drug to a man, which has its own burden and own potential side effects. And we're also potentially burdening the female partner with the risk of pregnancy. So there's a complex consent process. We need to make sure.
Right, that's huge.
Yeah, it's very different than any other kind of drug trial. Even in female contraception, just to make the analogy, men are not involved in those trials. Those are all about the woman and her taking the risk all on. So the efficacy studies involve a couple. We need to have the couple very involved in not only the consenting process, but also in the monitoring process that goes on. The woman, if she's worried that she's pregnant, she needs to have access to pregnancy tests, for example, and counseling and so forth. So for hormonal contraceptives, again, since we're suppressing sperm production, we enroll the couple, the man starts to use the product, and we are monitoring his sperm production throughout the study. And we don't have the couple rely on this novel method for contraception until his sperm count reaches this threshold. So that's unique to products that suppress sperm production. If, for example, you're developing a method that you're hoping is the one thinks is going to be effective immediately, that would be a different study design. So, and then we have had the couple rely on the hormonal method for a year, throughout which the man is having his sperm counted on a monthly basis. We see them both every 3 months. She's keeping a menstrual diary. So we're really trying to understand if there is a pregnancy, what happened, what went wrong or whatever. And also we have to design it at some level to minimize the woman's risk of pregnancy. So it's a big commitment for these couples. I mean, they're involved in the study for 18 to 24 months when it's all said and done. And from that, we can extrapolate a pregnancy rate based upon, again, that monitoring. Ultimately, we wouldn't expect a product to require men to have their sperm count analyzed every month. So the next study will have to be a study where we take some of those checks out, and that will be the kind of a real world phase 3 study.
And if the listeners want to support your research in some ways, what are ways that they could do that?
Well, you could talk to your friends. I mean, I think really, honestly, one of the biggest things is having real conversations about contraception and trying to, what do men think? I cited some survey data, but I think the more people are talking about contraception and reproductive agency and sharing the burden of contraception and what does this look like for my life in 10 years, 20 years, those are really important conversations to sort of, it's not really, I mean, I agree, I use the word destigmatize, but I really think what I'm trying to say is the more we can talk about reproduction and understand it, the more comfortable we are with taking control of our own bodies and our own reproductive health. So I do think really just talking about male contraception, introducing the concept is really important. If people are compelled to volunteer to be in a research study and that works for them, that's great. supporting the Male Contraceptive Initiative. And I guess really in this day and age in the United States, really thinking about how important it is that we do scientific research and that that is a priority for our public funds and our government, and that we prioritize listening to science and really delving into that and thinking about it and realizing that that's the future of innovation in our country. I mean, I think those conversations are really important no matter where we're working.
Oh my gosh, you've just like perfectly encapsulated why I do this podcast. I came for science. Yes. Like we need to talk about sex and reproduction. It's a normal part of our biology. If we don't talk about it, it's dangerous. If we don't educate people about it, they're going to educate themselves in other less accurate ways. And we need to stand up for science.
We do. And we also need to be ready for innovation and not just say, oh, well, women do contraception. That works just fine.
Right.
Well, it's not working great. 40% of pregnancies are unplanned. So, be open to the idea that things we hadn't thought about before may be ways to innovatively change problems.
Yes, and that's how we work as a species. We're an innovative species, and to stop and say it's good enough just doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. I learned so much. I'm sure our listeners have a million questions just like I did, and we'll put your information on our website so they can follow up with you if they have questions. Great. And thanks for joining us.
Cool. Thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate being here and you doing this work. It's just so important that we have these conversations.
And thank you all for listening. Thanks also to our production team, Isabel Espinoza, Lane Patton, and Daphne Trillana. The music used in this episode is from I Don't Smoke by the Mythical Score Society.